It seems as though Mark Pope is leaving BYU and headed home to Kentucky. But is it actually home? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12, an emergency edition. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. ESPN reports that Mark Pope is finalizing a 5-year deal to be the Kentucky head coach. This from Jeff Borzello and Pete Thamel. And maybe the first issue I have with this is the first line of the article says, after being turned down by multiple top-tier candidates, Kentucky is turning to one of its own as the school's next men's basketball coach. It dilutes who Mark Pope is and what he's done at BYU. Now, nobody expected what you got out of this last season for the Cougars. And I can guarantee you this, had Mark Pope not had the success that he had in 2024 at BYU, he would not be in the running, much less getting the Kentucky job. But maybe the first question I pose here for a guy that came to BYU in 2019 is, he's an alum, right? And this is a huge job that Scott Drew has turned down, and rumors are that Dan Hurley has also turned it down, and Nate Oates. But is it home? You know, the guy has been, from being an assistant at BYU to the head coach at Utah Valley to the head coach at BYU. He's done the whole Utah gamut. He is a native of Omaha, Nebraska. He's a guy that has spent a lot of time in the Midwest and out West. And really the only part of his life you can trace back to Kentucky is the time he was in college. And back then was a team captain on the 96 national championship team under Rick Pitino. It's not the same Kentucky he went to. Like, think about where you went to college, if you did, or even high school, and how different it is today than it was then. So I get, as an alum, you know, you want to wear the colors and coach your school, but to me, it's almost confusing that a guy who's fit the brand of BYU, who's fit the brand of Utah, which is one of the more eclectic states in the country, would leave. And maybe the reason I say that is, look back at the horns down T-shirts or body paint or whatever it was for BYU students this year at the Marriott Center. And it was the BYU bench. It was Mark Pope who said, that's not us. We don't do that. You know, he apologized and made students who had horns down shirts on change at his BYU game. Even Texas, their head coach, Rodney Terry, who has been known for being soft, comes out in the press conference and says, we didn't ask for that. And Pope's a guy who had success at BYU. You know, obviously this last season, 23-11 in the Big 12. He shocks the country for how good BYU was at the Big 12. 110-52 at BYU, and was the head coach at Utah Valley, going 77-56. When he was hired at BYU, I didn't think it was a splash hire in 2019. I was frankly shocked that BYU had hired Mark Pope. I didn't know if he had proven enough at Utah Valley, despite having progression there, to be the BYU head coach at such a prominent university. And now I feel the same thing. Is he ready to coach Kentucky? Does he have the cojones to coach Kentucky? And why would he leave BYU? You know, I remember talking in 2023, that the end of the 2023 season, about the future of Mark Pope at BYU and what that might look like. A guy who played in the NBA, a guy who played for Kentucky again, won that national championship, and went to the NIT quarterfinals, had been to the NCAA Division I round of 64, and then he goes 19-15 to the WCC, the West Coast Conference, 7-9 in conference play. And the thought was, okay, going into the Big 12, is this the guy it was like a Johnny Dawkins at UCF. Is this the guy that you want to lead you into the best conference in college basketball? And it turns out that he was able to adjust. Again, if he doesn't adjust, he doesn't have the Kentucky job. But now it felt like the from the Marriott Center to the way the BYU faithful had embraced him to the way that he has fit Utah was the perfect little mixture. How is he going to recruit at Kentucky? What is he going to use? Hey, I went to the round of 64 at BYU. Hey, I did that twice. Hey, I went to the NIT quarterfinals. You know, I played at Kentucky, but that was, 96, 30 years ago. I went to the CBI semifinals with Utah Valley. What is he going to use at Kentucky that says, I'm a basketball coach who's proven myself? I don't think there's much. If I'm a Kentucky fan, buddy, I'm worried. Did you just get a new Tubby Smith Did you just like reload on some Tubby Smith action? If you're a BYU fan, he's the guy that fit the culture. He's the guy that fit to an extreme, to the furthest extreme of having kids cover up horns down as not to look crass. That doesn't fly at Kentucky. Going to the round of 64 doesn't fly. You just hired a coach who's sure he has Kentucky acumen, which a lot of people have played for Kentucky between 1996 and 2024, the Rick Pitino era to now. Sure, he has that acumen, but enough to warrant the job? Is this because Jay Wright said no? Because Scott Drew said no? I mean, as a Baylor alum, I apologize. Had Scott Drew taken this job, I wouldn't, ruin this for BYU. And if I have to peg, this is the most important part here. You probably need to understand. If I have to peg a winner and a loser here, the winner might be BYU and the loser might be Mark Pope. You say, well, how? He got maybe the best job in college basketball. That's the problem. Nothing in his resume says that Mark Pope is ready for the best job in college basketball. And everything at BYU says we have the resources to not only turn around a program in 1 year, but also provide for a coach to be successful in the long term. Mark Pope got worse and worse and worse and worse until his fifth year for the Cougars. He was good in the Big 12 and still couldn't get out of round one against Duquesne, who was overseeded at 11 to help a school that couldn't play on Sundays. That's bad. If you're a Kentucky fan, you're unhappy. You probably should be unhappy. If you're a BYU fan, you say goodbye. Mark Pope is gone. He's going to Kentucky. Like that. ESPN doesn't report a 5-year deal is being finalized without, I'm reading here, like he's replacing John Calipari. You went from John Calipari to Mark Pope. In 3 years, Mark Pope could have been, wow, what a name, flipping the program around and having consistency at BYU. And again, the reason I think BYU is the winner here, you probably keep most of your players. BYU is one of the few schools in the country that players are committed to the school more than the coach, the culture more than the coach, because of the religious affiliation. And at Kentucky, Pope's going to have a super hyper-imposed spotlight that he's not ready for, that he hasn't had in the past. I have heard stories about Pope being a hothead at BYU. I have heard stories about the way he treated people in some circles that weren't cool. Outwardly, he represented the school well. Inwardly, I don't think there are too many people who are upset about this. If I'm a BYU fan, the culture is still there. Most of the players are probably still there. They have faith to lean on. And Mark Pope's at Kentucky, where he's going to have to go in the portal. He's going to have to dole out NIL. He's going to have to coach the best team the best program in college basketball. And he doesn't have the acumen. He doesn't have the experience. He's not proven that he can do that he can manage NIL, that he can manage the transfer portal at an elite level. This is a bad hire for Kentucky. And it might end up being great for BYU. Because at the end of this, sure, he represented the extreme, but was Mark Pope the future? I don't know. Maybe we go to Buckyball. Maybe we go to, some random former Baylor assistant. That's what everybody else is doing nowadays. Maybe we go to Bryce Drew. Yep, Bryce Drew. How great would that be? You'd be winning. Bryce Drew is much better than Mark Pope. This has been and always will be emergency episode. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose grande.